Uzma, if we can, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So as people are joining us, I'm just going to introduce myself and then introduce my colleagues here this evening. So my name is Dame Alison Peacock. I'm the CEO of the Chartered College of Teaching. And I'm really delighted this evening to be hosting a discussion with 3 of our members. And we're going to be thinking about how we can support Black and Asian women in the profession. So if I could have the first slide, please, Uzma, thank you. So I've been contacted by these 3 brilliant women in the last 2 weeks. Each of them got in touch with me to say, Alison, what can we do? We would love to work with the college. We would love to work with you. We would love to think about how we can all collaborate to help colleagues throughout the teaching profession as we think about growing their career. And so I'm delighted, you've got a slide in front of you that shows you who we've got with us. So we're going to hear first of all from Uzma Sarwar, who is a fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching. Uzma is a lead STEM practitioner and head of faculty. We're then going to hear from Youlande Harrowell, who is a member of the college. She's an assistant principal, and she's going to be talking to us about the importance of visible diversity. And then I'm delighted that we're also going to hear from Aretha Banton, who's another member of the college, who's going to think and share with us her ideas around how we can support women in their early career and what we might do together. And both Youlande and Aretha have also just very recently launched a new network called Mindful Equity UK. They have a Twitter handle and a website, and I'm sure they're going to be talking about that. So really an exciting opportunity for colleagues right across the college to come together and to work to listen to these 3 really dynamic women who want to take this agenda forward. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to be here and to hand over to them. So I'm going to hand over to Uzma first, and let's listen to what you've got to say. Thank you so much, Uzma.
Thank you, Alison. Good evening. Can I just take this opportunity to thank Alison and the Chartered College for this platform today, and Youlande and Aretha as well for being inspirational role models in the short time that I've known you and sharing the stage with me at this important event. I'm the daughter of Pakistani immigrant parents from a working class background. I saw 0 representation of people like myself growing up in the east coast of Scotland some 40 years ago. Many would say things have changed since then, and although there are more people on the ground from a diverse background in the NHS, some pools of education and other sectors, at senior level, there is a disparity. And I suppose that is one of my drivers for change. I'm one of 5 in spite of children for whom race was a huge barrier from a young age, and it's that has driven me to the front line of education. It's really important for me that we use Black Lives Matter and the movement to make way for action and change. And I wanted to use today's platform to ask those questions, those difficult questions. So I want to begin by looking at disparities in data and labelling. In 2018, of the 22,400 head teachers cross-phase, Gov.uk reported 92.9% as being white. Other sources, however, report this figure being as high as 97%. We must ask why the difference. Why? Because if you don't know how big the problem is, how can you address it strategically? How can you report accurately of any changes or even measure impact accurately? The government has also launched the Parker's Review into ethnic diversity on boards across UK companies. It set out targets for each FTSE 100 board to have at least 1 person of colour as a director by 2021, and each FTSE 250 board by 2024. This kind of labelling of people of colour is unhelpful, whether it be in business or education. It does not help in recruitment, trackability, or in the support of staff. When I'm asked for my ethnicity on a recruitment form, I want it to be worth more than a tick in a box. In addition, we need to ask ourselves, do we need more reviews? Or is it time to put action plans in place? What is the delay? Is there enough desire for change at every level? Instead of using different categorization models like these, which are unhelpful, there are positive action models set out, for example, one suggested by the Research Fairness Committee London. In this model, sophisticated data analysis is used to improve recruitment and retention of BAME educators. Figures are published, including statistics involving the pay gap as well, for transparency. By following such a model, the point at which BAME educators fall behind their white counterparts can be identified and real-time intervention can take place. Here, we are not talking about closing the gaps between students, which we're all familiar with, but we're actually putting a lens on closing the gap between staff. Around 10 years ago, I moved from Scotland to the multicultural capital of the Northwest, Manchester. In one of the first schools I worked in, there was a stark underrepresentation of Black colleagues, and it was very evident. The school had a very high intake of Black students, yet the only role models in this large establishment were the majority Black cleaning team and a few support staff. We know that ethnic diversity works. We know this because of the research done in the business world. The McKinsey, the world's most prestigious consultancy, have shown that the least diverse businesses are more likely to be less profitable. They've also shown that companies in the top quartile for ethnic diversity are 33% more likely to see higher than average profits. This correlation is strongly pronounced in UK companies in particular. For the second part of my presentation, I'd like to turn your attention to the pandemic that we are currently living through. It is well documented that Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups in the UK are at increased risk of death from coronavirus, with Black Afro-Caribbean, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi populations being particularly at risk. Public Health England reports a 10 to 50% greater risk to COVID-19 in BAME communities. What is disappointing is that staff under the government guidelines have still got to request a risk assessment if they belong to these ethnic groups. We have to ask ourselves how accessible we're making seeking support, and within school risk assessments, how prominent have BAME staff and students been? Considering the effects of the pandemic on BAME staff, what support structures are in place in education establishments to support colleagues? Have schools reached out enough to community leaders and representatives to help in this drive? BAME Ed has set out 5 action points for guidance to support leaders in schools, but how is this guidance being implemented? In terms of our students, the pandemic has meant this year that we have relied heavily on teacher predictions at A-level and GCSE to produce centre-assessed grades. A logarithm will then be applied to this for the final grade to be calculated. It is well documented that teacher predictions are some 30% lower for BME students. Where is the wider regulation here? Which framework has been applied to decrease the impact of unconscious bias and beliefs of intrinsic limits of intelligence? The House of Commons Education Committee has published a report warning of these issues again. But where is the standardisation model being used by Ofqual? Where is the transparency and scrutiny of the framework being applied? There is an opportunity for students to make an appeal in the process provided by Ofqual. However, they have to make that call. And again, the Runnymede Trust have said that this kind of process puts a burden of proof on the student. In both of these cases, you're putting the burden of proof back on the people that are actually at disadvantage. How fair is that as a model? In conclusion, we need to consider target setting through all ranks of the organisation and commit publicly to them. Challenge the status quo, because we can and must do. Diversity breeds success. I would urge every educator to ask those questions, those difficult questions. Be the voice of your students as well as the staff members around you and yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're now going to hear from Youlande, who has a slide deck. So we're going to hand over to you, and we'll have questions afterwards, if that's all right, Uzma, when everybody's given their presentation. So Youlande, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you again for providing us a stage through the college to discuss this important topic. I'd like to talk about the need for visible diversity. And just to provide a bit of context as to where I'm coming from, I was fortunate enough to attend a wonderful secondary school in Southwest London, hugely diverse, not only from the support staff and the students, but also the staff body and the senior leadership team. Seeing such a wonderfully diverse staff body enabled me to feel confident, to feel like I belong, to see role models, and I felt as if I could do anything. And so I would argue that the need for visible diversity is ever more present now. So the research is currently showing us that a sense of belonging can engender an increase in motivation, which I can attest to from my days of secondary school. A reduction in absenteeism because you feel at home, you feel a part of a community, part of a movement to and within your education. And finally, that there are positive academic outcomes. I know that to be true, again, from my own experience, and those are the experiences of students that I have taught in the schools where we have been very diverse in our staff body. Sadly, a significant factor in a young person's sense of belonging is their relationships with their teachers. And I say sadly because if we don't address that and create a community where the students can feel connected, it actually negatively impacts on their ability to feel as though they belong. And those three markers I've just put there about motivation, about absenteeism, and academic outcomes can all be negatively impacted if we don't have and forge strong relationships. Within the OECD, which we fall in, 1 in 4 students are now starting to feel as if they do not belong in their schools. That can help to understand why exclusions are increasing, why academic outcomes for some of the most disadvantaged students are on the fall. And again, how does this come into the visible diversity? I'll get there shortly. If you then mix the fact that a student feels that they don't belong with coming from a low socioeconomic background, this compounds the impact of a feeling, a sense of not belonging within a community. And in particular, we're talking about the school community. They're twice more likely to feel as though they don't belong due to the disadvantage that they face. And they're 4 times more likely to be excluded. And if we really do mean in our AIPs, as many of us are writing now, that all children deserve to feel as if that they belong, that the education system is for them, and that their outcomes matter too, addressing whether a child feels that they belong is right. So there are positive outcomes for having diverse school communities by addressing belonging, by increasing diversity in school. But it doesn't just benefit the students, it also benefits the staff. Again, going back to my story, being in a school that was led by a Black woman in the early 2000s was phenomenally impactful for my confidence and my self-efficacy. And as soon as I left that environment, I started to feel as if I didn't fit. Going into FE, it didn't feel right. My academic outcomes began to suffer. Going on to university, it was even more stark. I felt like the other. I felt as if I didn't belong. I looked at my lecturers and those involved in my particular academic school, and there was absolutely no one who looked like me. And what message is that sending to the young people if they do not see people who look like them on studying and being academics? So if we look at the positive outcomes for actually addressing belonging, we can see positivity in the impact it can have for students, as well as staff. For BAME students particularly, for all students particularly, schools need, it's important we acknowledge that schools are microcosms for the societies that are yet to come. If that's true, and a student is in a situation where there is limited diversity, how will the student learn to accept and to usualize difference in their surroundings if all they see is similarity? For BAME students, it smashes barriers and it dispels any myths of them not being able to achieve and succeed. If you see someone who looks like you in a position of power being successful, it gives them that strength, that confidence, and it helps to build resilience. Thinking about some of us who have students who feel affinity to musicians, they are constantly bombarded through social media, role models who are making money, who look successful. And if they're not seeing that in their day-to-day life, they're not understanding that there are other ways to that financial success, that academic success. If we move to staff, for all staff, having a diverse staff working body, we open up the opportunity to have diverse thought, to have alternative perspectives, which if you are only working with those who look like you, who have similar experiences to you, you would be missing. And so it's such a rewarding and positive impact on a school community to have diverse staff bodies. But particularly for BAME staff, seeing people like you in leadership who understand your challenge, your struggle, it acts as that critical mass of support to provide you that insight of what to do next and how to achieve more highly. To give you an example, if we think about any movie about a successful businessman, it's often those bar meetings that happen behind closed doors with a glass of whiskey and a cigar, and the partners and the CEOs are having conversations about that young whippersnapper who's just joined the company and reminds them very much of them and what they were like when they were younger. But for me, as a young Black woman, there wasn't someone in that boardroom saying, oh, that new lady, she reminds me of me when I was younger. And having that cheerleader on those tables where decisions are being made is highly important. But I acknowledge, and I'm very clear, and attest to that in my career, that it wasn't necessarily, and it didn't have to just be cheerleaders who looked like me. Having allies who are action, who look at me past the colour, past my academic differences, and look at the talent and are willing to coach and to encourage and to develop new and differing talent in school leadership. And so myself and Aretha, as Alison thankfully mentioned earlier, we created a service, a community called Mindful Equity UK. We feel that if you are able to if you are able to align yourself and work with Black and Asian women early in their careers from the very beginning and be their cheerleaders, build their confidence, have those conversations about what leadership could look like if that is what they wish to do. It allows them to build that self-efficacy, that confidence to move forward and work towards those job goals later on, and hopefully shortening that pipeline of development rather than it taking many, many years for some who have that it happens for. It actually would happen a lot more quickly with that support. And so we're really excited to launch our network event, and our first one will occur on the 26th of August from 10 to 11, and we've got an Eventbrite ticket sale that's available. So we're targeting those early career teachers because we really want them to know from day one, these are the opportunities, these are the steps of what it looks like to get into leadership and to support you from the very beginning of your career. And that's why we created the In This Together movement. The events will happen bi-termly. And so please do save the date, and the sorts of things that we'll be talking about will be sharing experiences of Black and Asian women educators, because if we think about what it feels like that last week of August, just before you walk into your first inset, what to expect, what to do, but hearing that from someone who's walked your footsteps will be hugely empowering for them. We'll have some keynote speakers at the events, and finally a bit of career progression CPD as well. So that's the end of my part, and I'd love to hand over to Aretha.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And thank you, Adam. Do you want to go first, Alison? Okay. So thank you for inviting us to share this stage with you. It's a real privilege to be here, and thank you to Youlande and Uzma as well, who have worked with me for the last week to put this together. I think we've done an amazing job, so well done, guys. Okay, so I'm going to talk about points that we should be considering when we move into solutions. So it's really important to note that there are no hard and fast answers here. There's no easy route. One size will not fit all. So we have to really be creative. And I don't pretend to have all the answers, but hopefully within this section, you'll find something in there that you can take away and action tomorrow. So in order to identify a starting point, we have to learn from lived experiences. And you've heard two very personal accounts already. So the data tells us one part of the story, and the lived experiences tells us the other. And that means that we need to engage in really bold conversations with staff. Sometimes it means that we're going to hear things that make us feel really uncomfortable. So we're going to have that seat shifting, avoid eye contact moment where you're, just letting things go and not getting involved. Sometimes it means hearing about times when we've made the wrong call. And I include myself in that as well. So we don't always get things right. And we need to speak, we speak about resilience and risk taking and being brave when it comes to our students. That's what we do. We say that the learning takes place where there's a challenge. But you know what? We need to practice what we preach. We tend to avoid these uncomfortable conversations like the plague. So we have corridor conversations. We have the I only have a couple of minute conversations because they're really, really difficult. Experiences of discrimination can be traumatic, and we need to recognise that. As you've heard, it influences a student's or a member of staff's sense of belonging, and that's so important. So these are emotionally charged conversations, and we need to make sure that we think really, really carefully about them beforehand, and that we have created a solution-focused framework within which to have these discussions. We also need to have really honest and bold conversations with ourselves. So we need to take time to reflect on our own unconscious biases, and we all have them. Humans are really good at categorizing information. We're really efficient thinkers. But we probably ought to do that less when we're thinking about each other. We need to think about whether our views are having a positive influence on our processes. And if they're not, why not? And what do we need to change? We also need to consider aspects of ethical leadership. So look around you. Is the leadership team representative of a diverse group of people? Does it represent the people you are engaging with and supporting? And if not, why not? Where is that missing or bowed link in your chain of succession? The part of the chain that is causing the issue for your diverse groups. That's what you need to find, and that's what you need to fix. You'll have heard this one before, but it is really true. We need to live and not laminate our values. So figure out, what are your underlying values? Who are you representing? But crucially, what will your legacy be? How will you avoid tokenism and inconsistency? We need to breathe life into those values and ensure that they filter into every single part of our organisation, and that includes recruitment and training. A member of staff's lived experiences should not be different from the espoused values, and if they are, then ask why. So we also need to ensure transparency. Every member of staff should know the routes for career progression. They should know what training's on offer. This allows colleagues to plan their routes effectively and, crucially, to seek out that support when they need it most. Next slide, please. Okay. Thanks. In order to make changes, we also need to hear from others. We need to have those bold conversations. But you know what? Going back to Uzma's point right at the start, we need to actualize solutions. We do need to acknowledge harm where harm has occurred, but we just can't get stuck there. We have the data, we're discussing the current landscape, but now we need to focus on changing the current landscape. We cannot get stuck with just calling people out. We now need to call people to action. I don't want to have the same conversation with the next generation of teachers. And I don't want that next generation of teachers have the same discussion with the ones that follow. We need to expend more time and energy in implementing the solutions instead of discussing them. We don't need to start from scratch. There are solutions that already exist. So there's research-based recommendations that you can implement tomorrow. We need to look through our toolkits and pull out all of those solutions that will work for our organisation. And I'd encourage you to check out some research by Professor Paul Miller from the University of Greenwich. And I believe he's sharing the stage with Alison next week. His research is on exactly doing that. We also need to look both ways. So we need to look inwards and we need to look outwards. We do need to start off by looking inwards and looking at ourselves and looking at our organisations. We absolutely need to fix and stabilise our own greenhouses before we start throwing stones. But we also need to look outwards. So what are other people getting right? What are other organisations doing right? What are we doing right? And how can we share that good practice to support others? Over the last few weeks, we've been looking into the whole journey for teachers. So from post-16 into university, into teaching, into leadership. And we've been engaging with people from across the UK, so including Scotland and Wales. And we're finding two things crop up consistently. Firstly, regional experiences are very different to those from London. The existing evidence base and solutions tend to be really London-centric, so therefore the solutions don't easily map over to other parts of the country. So therefore, when we're looking at our solutions, we need to build in a level of flexibility so actually they can be used elsewhere and not just in that London-centric bubble. Secondly, people tend to look after their own section of the pipeline and work in isolation. So we're not having enough solution-focused conversations with our neighbours. Joined up working is really, really important if we're going to identify those missing or broken links. It's also really important to note that some organisations may be a little bit reluctant to change, but this is where that joined up working is so crucial. My voice alone will not change organisational practice on a grand scale, but if we look outwards, if we start to share good practice, that's where we might see a bit more movement. Peer influence is a wonderful thing. My last slide, please. Thank you. So if we want our educators of the future to be resilient and innovative and inspirational, we need to support them to develop those skills early on. Once a Black or Asian woman reaches middle leadership, believe me, it's highly likely they already have these skills. So those diverse leaders programs are happening too late. They need to drop in a lot earlier. We don't want teachers dropping out of education and training early on just because they're having a really tough journey. We want to be able to provide support at the earliest stage in their career pathway so that actually when those difficult and challenging situations arrive, they have that toolkit of solutions ready. And that could be through mentoring or through coaching or other mediums. But we do believe that early intervention at that early career stage will make such a difference. And I'll give you an example, give you my example. So I'm from a family that includes social workers, EYFS specialists and nurses, all Black women. But every single one of us took the most difficult route into those careers. So if you look on that diagram, we're those bendy pipes. We didn't take that direct route. Why? I think because we didn't have access to some of that information. We didn't know what professional organisations existed. We didn't know what support networks there were. We didn't know who to turn to or where to turn to. And none of us had done it before, so we couldn't coach each other. There's lots of research to show that memberships to professional and informal networks can be positive contributors in the retention and progression of BAME teachers. I consider myself to be quite lucky. I've worked with some amazing leaders who have become that network of support for me. But those are leaders in my school working with me. And that is not a shared experience, and it really ought to be. For some teachers, having the access to the right support network can make all the difference in their career pathway. It can be the difference between staying in the profession or leaving. And this is why we set Mindful Equity UK up. It was to ensure that we support early career teachers and support a more sustainable pipeline of talent for Black and Asian women educators. That's me. So thank you for listening. And Alison, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So in terms of the Chartered College, what are we doing about all of this? And I have to say that I have to be completely honest with you and say, probably as an example of a white privileged woman, a dame no less, my knowledge about these things is quite limited, probably. I can't claim to have experiences of experiencing racism as I've been growing up and throughout my career. In fact, from my point of view, actually, progression throughout teaching has felt kind of quite haphazard, but I've never felt held back. But that doesn't stop me from completely empathizing with the stories that we've heard this evening and the stories of other colleagues. And the whole reason that I chose to join the Chartered College was because I believe that teaching offers an example and offers futures for our children and young people. When we get it right in school, we offer hope. And that has to be hope for a diverse society. And as we heard from Youlande talking about the fact that our schools should be microcosms of the future that we want to see. And where we have schools that are all white schools, we have a much greater issue there, but it's no less a priority, it seems to me. So what are we doing at the Chartered College? Well, firstly, we've started to have these conversations, and I hope that I'm listening as CEO, which is why we've got this event this evening and why I've been contacted by the very impressive women that we've got with us tonight. But also we're trying to look internally as an organisation about what else we can do. So we have got working parties within the Chartered College, within our own team, looking at the images that we put out on social media, the authors that we choose to write for us, the people that we ask to peer review articles that are sent in for us, the processes that we go through when we're looking to recruit new staff, the ways in which we promote greater diversity when we're looking to elect for our council. So we have council elections that will come up in September. Last year, we actually only had one candidate from a different ethnic background other than white. We would love to have colleagues listening to this event this evening who put themselves forward for election, because we need a more diverse council. And our council has 22 representatives from teaching across the country. So you can see we do have some colleagues from ethnic backgrounds, but actually we need more. So we'd love your support with that. We have a group from our council who are looking at what we can do as a council for the Chartered College to actually help with this agenda. But most importantly, we have our members and our fellows. We would love to have more fellows who are from the Black Asian community. We would love to be able to celebrate success. And in fact, one of the things that Youlande and Aretha asked me when they first contacted me was, well, what do you have to do to become a fellow? You know, what is this kind of secret club? Well, it isn't a secret club, but you can see why it might look as if it is. Basically, what this is, you know, if you've been teaching for 10 years and you are totally committed to the profession, then you need to find someone who can testify that that's the case, and then you just apply and just share your experience and why you think that becoming a fellow is really important. So that's something, again, that I would really encourage role models, because we do need to have those role models. And, you know, ultimately we'll need a new CEO at the college. Let's see if we can find someone who's perhaps not a white privileged woman to carry on the work. So there's a lot that we can do when we're thinking about recruiting teachers to our chartered teacher routes. It would be great if we can make sure that we have a more diverse set of colleagues who are studying for that. And this is a new status that we're developing through the college. And the idea is that we really present kind of the foremost thinking in terms of research and evidence. But actually this agenda, the diversity agenda, is totally so important that we want those colleagues to join us with that as well. And then when we're looking at chartered leadership, which is a new route that will start from January 2021, similarly, I hear your point about the fact that those women who have made it through to middle and senior leadership are not the ones we need to help because they've made it through that far. Having said that, I know there are a lot of colleagues on this conference this evening from Women Ed, and I know that Women Ed would say, wherever you're coming from, as a woman, you are much more likely to hold back than perhaps push forward, because that is one of the things that women do. So we still do need all to be encouraged. And again, I would love to think that we can have a diverse route through into chartered leadership. And chartered leadership, by the way, is not a substitute for MPQH. This is a way of thinking about leadership that is research informed, evidence informed, removing barriers to learning. And when we're thinking about barriers to learning, we've certainly heard from our speakers this evening that those barriers don't necessarily come from the kind of places that we would always expect them to come from. So some of those barriers are about being inspired by the teacher who is leading your thinking, the role models that we've heard about, the academic excellence. We need to see that, and all children need to see that. And in diverse schools where we have that range of colleagues all working and sharing together, we present the very best of what our society can achieve. So I do believe there's a lot that the Chartered College can do to help, but it would be very wrong of me to say much more this evening, because this is about our Black and Asian women colleagues who are really here to start thinking about what we do next. And we've had quite a few questions through. So I don't know, are we all right if I fire some questions at you, girls? Are we all right to try and see what we can do to answer them? Okay, here we go. Let's have a look. So one of the first questions that came through was people saying, where do you start? Where do you start with this? You know, so there's goodwill, but what do we do first? Who would like to take that one for us? Go on then, Youlande.
So I'll go back to the point as to why Aretha and I started Mindful Equity UK. We literally 3 weeks ago was sat down and just abject shock, horror, you know, 2 Black women and a Black man sitting on the same leadership team. How has this happened? How have we done? What are the timescale differences? Why is Aretha where she is at her age? Why am I where I am at my age? And really reflecting as to, well, how has that occurred? And it's been said, and I'll say it again, we start at the beginning. I think the training that is being provided for teachers at the moment does not fully prepare them for the journey that they're likely to embark upon in the schools as they are at the moment. I think that offering diverse courses for leadership when you're already a middle leader or already a senior leader is far too late. And if we aren't projecting, I mean, to use an example, the government is already running advertising campaigns to get more people into teaching, to draw a larger pool of people. Yet every time you see a Black person or an Asian person in these adverts, they're the teacher stood at the board. You can never really project or predict that they're going to be the head teacher one day, the CEO of the MAT. They're never presented that way. If you cannot be what you can't see. So if we're not starting at the very beginning and really portraying the diversity, the opportunity, the vast range of pipelines into leadership or teaching, period, we're doing them a disservice. So I think it's starting at the very beginning with the training providers that we have within teaching.
Thank you. Uzma, did you want to come in? Thank you.
I think Youlande is absolutely right. And only 3% of the largest academy trusts in the UK have got a non-white CEO. So the figures are there, the facts are there. I don't think anybody will quibble over them. But I think some of the comments that I've read tonight are, you know, thank you for sharing those facts. Now, some of that isn't out there and it's not public knowledge. It's not talked about. It's just accepted as some people of a non-white background would say, that's your lot. You know, you just get on with it because the barriers are there. But they don't need to be there for the next generation. They don't need to be there for the next leaders. And that's why I think mindful equity and organisations like that will allow us to, you know, approach an organisation that will strengthen and you know, eliminate some of those barriers. You don't live through experiences so that the next generation live through exactly the same. You try and make things better for all of our kids, and that's why we're all in education. So I think we need to start with the facts and the reality, and have those, not just keep recirculating, you know, the fact that, you know, we've got a focus group, for example. What are we doing with the focus group? What's happening? And like Aretha said, you know, the actions. And the real-time actions. What's happening? Where's the review? Where's the systematic process in place to actually see if it's working? And if it's not working, let's adapt it, let's change it, just like you would any model. There's lots of great business models that show us that diversity works, and they show us that, you know, active action models work. We can translate some of those into education, but the desire for change has to be there, not just the chat for change. And I think there's a stark difference there. So I think where there's a will, there's a way, but it has to be championed more at every level within leadership, and people need to be given that voice, and a true voice rather than a token. Again, like Aretha and Youlande said before, tokenism it's not what this is about.
And I think there's a real danger, isn't there, that at the moment it's quite fashionable to talk about these issues. We have to make sure that we go beyond what's fashionable. This needs to be something that sustains and is deep and is long lasting. So yeah, absolutely. There's on the chat panel, there's a lot of resonance with your bendy pipes. People can see what how that resonates. So what can we do about that? Again, one of you, the bendy pipes, what do we do about making them a bit straighter for people?
So I think in terms of those bendy pipes, I mean, I did run it past Youlande earlier, and she said, "What is that?" I'm glad it took off. But in terms of those bendy pipes, I think actually it is about making sure that at every level, people know what's out there. It's that misinformation and that lack of information. It's that lack of direction and that lack of support and coaching, and that comes right back into education, right back into those primary, secondary years, career guidance pathways. It's a long-term journey, and that's why we're not looking just at one tiny bit when we're doing our bits of research. Actually, we're looking at the whole journey, because actually it's all linked in. You can't just separate one experience and then tag in a little bit later. It has to be consistent throughout the whole course, and so the whole system needs to be looked at actually in order to address those bendy pipes, because you can only do that if people have the information and they know where to look. And if careers guidance in schools is not good enough, they won't have that. If the guided choices when it comes to those options evening don't account for what the child actually wants to do rather than what the timetable blocks actually dictate, we won't get that. If when you're going off to university, you're not accessing the right support there, or someone's not telling you about all these wonderful networks that you can join at that stage, we're not going to address the bendy pipe. And then at NQT level and going into leadership, actually, it shouldn't be a fight for someone to really go off and do their own bit of research. People have done that journey already. The information is out there. It should be easy to access. And if it's not, then we need to change that, because that's the only way we'll end up with a more direct route for everybody.
Anybody else got any advice about that? I'm just, in terms of the career, I will come to you, Youlande. Just, we were contacted by the Education Employers charity. They are doing a lot of work and have done for a number of years, but they're doing work with the BAME community, providing role models for young children, primary age children, where they provide speakers who will come virtually into school, not actually into school, to talk about their careers. And again, this is really important because, as you said, you know, in your presentations, if there's no one in your family that knows who you ask or how you apply or which course you should follow, then of course opportunities do lead to those bendy pipes, don't they? They lead to not being able to get quite to where you need to be. Youlande, you were going to come in.
Thank you. So my specialism is post-16 leadership, and I think why I fell there was primarily because of my negative experience, which research supports, in school is one of the main reasons why a lot of teachers do go into their specialisms. And just to echo those sentiments about careers and advice and guidance, if we think about the majority of teachers, when they decide to become teachers, they'll go from their undergraduate degree, teacher training, straight into the education system. Then that creates this barrier between schools, primary, secondary, sixth form, etc., and the working world. And so many teachers, if you're in a school by yourself, you might be contacted by this company and that company, but actually you don't have any connections yourself. If your line manager says, right, we want to get the students informed about becoming a lawyer, etc., do you know any black lawyers? Do you know? It's difficult for them to do. But where I career changed into teaching, I have a network on LinkedIn, and I frequently trawl LinkedIn to connect with those role models there. And I think we do need to, within our schools, think about that careers of guidance specifically around teaching. Because at the moment, if you were doing a careers day, how many people actually do bring educators in to come and speak to them? It doesn't have to be their teachers they see every day. And every teacher knows you could say something 100 times. Someone else comes in to do an assembly and they'll say exactly what you've said the whole academic year. And every child's like, yes, miss, I get, yep, I'm good. I believe that. And so it's really important to make those connections and invest time in our careers advice and guidance, and provide the full spectrum of what teaching is about. You're a leader in your classroom if you remain a teacher throughout your teaching career, middle leadership, etc. Even TAs, you're a leader with the support you're providing to those students. So it's about showing that spectrum from as early as possible.
Absolutely. Uzma, thank you. When we were speaking, you were talking about how you didn't go into teaching initially, but how your mum absolutely drilled into you that learning and education was going to be the way forward. Talk to us about your process of building your career.
I come from a family of Pakistani immigrant family, which as I said before, and both my parents didn't go to university. They didn't have that opportunity, and we didn't come from a privileged background. We faced the typical, we talk about BAME students being more likely to be disadvantaged. Well, I was one of those stats. So for my parents, both my mum and my dad, my mum really championed us and said, she always used to say, get out of here. That was her tagline. It's referring to where we lived and the obstacles we faced daily. And she said, education will get you out of there. And that's all she just drummed that into us. And no matter how hard life was on a daily basis, that was the goal. And, she did a damn fine job because we all got out of there. And, we don't want the next generation to, of any of our students to face the barriers that we had, because then what have we learned? We're educators. We're here for change. That's why you come into education, at any line of education, that's why you come in. And so I think it's really important to not only share your experiences, but also be aware of who championed you at the start, and be aware of your roots, be proud of your roots. There's so many students that I've encountered over my, my career in teaching that will, try and change their name because they're embarrassed. They will change their identity. They won't admit for where they're from. If they know a second language, if it's not one that's glorified like French or Portuguese or something, because it has that kind of air of a sense of kind of fashion around it, and which Punjabi or a Bengali or an Afrikaans language doesn't hold. And again, I don't know why that is, but that's how they live it on the ground. That's what our students say. And I think we've got a big job in telling them that it's okay. My students hear me talking, not all the time, but talking in a different language to my dad or something. If I've just said, or Dad, I'll have to talk to you later, and I've used a phrase in my own language, that's empowering as well. And I'm not saying that non-white counterparts can't do that or anybody else can't do that. What I'm saying is that modelling has to come in every angle of what you're doing, because you're not just teaching your subject from the front, you're leading, like Youlande says, you're a leader in your classrooms, you're leading on so many perspectives, and those young children will be inspired from you. And they might not have that champion like I did at home. They might not have the mum saying, come on, get out of here, you can do this. And therefore it's so much more important that whatever time we have with them, we encourage that. And going back to careers guidance, it needs to be transparent. Even now, sometimes the idea that people from an Asian background want to become doctors, it's laughed at. And it shouldn't be laughed at. It's really inspiring that a child says, I want to be a doctor. Why not? Why not? Why, if you want to be a doctor, just like if you want to be a teacher or a teacher leader, here are the routes, like have been mentioned today. Here are the routes. Here are the mentor programs. Yes, there might be a ceiling for certain kids, and we can't say, oh, you can do anything you want. In that sense, we have to give proper guidance. But to cap them very early on and just laugh it off, that breaks a student. And a student from any background, but to actually affiliate it to the background that they come from and their heritage, that's destructive. And we can't allow for those conversations in our staff rooms, and I'm not saying in my current school that happens, but I have heard it happening. I have, and colleagues do say that does sometimes happen. And so I think to be aware that happens and then speak about it, whether you're a white professional or a non-white professional in education, we can all work together to get rid of these barriers, because they are barriers and they will stop our children reaching their potential. Youlande spoke about every child reaching their potential and meeting their needs. Well, how can you do that if you dampen their whole aspiration very early on? And what else have they got in their toolkit to make another decision or to help them carry on with their journey if you've already kind of hindered it? And I think we need to realise that words are powerful. They're very powerful, and they're more powerful used amongst children. But yeah, that ownership needs to come back to us, I think.
Thank you. So powerful what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with everything that you're talking about. One of the comments that's come through on the chat is a question about what do you do if you find yourself in a school that is not diverse? So Youlande, supposing you go and you decide you're going to become head teacher of a school, and then actually it's a mainly white school. What are the challenges? What might be different there compared with where you are now, potentially?
So I'm a big believer. Well, I've worked in a context where that was the case, and it was wonderful to see how we addressed it. So what we did was we brought the community to the school. So we brought that diverse community to the school. It's about getting those speakers in. But embedding that in the curriculum. It's not a knee-jerk. It's not an afterthought. So starting there, first of all, is making sure that the students are exposed to a plethora of people from all walks of life to give them those different diverging voices. And then as a school, you have to look to yourselves within your team. Well, how are you advertising posts? Where are you advertising? It might be geographically, that's the nature of the community that you work within, and that's one situation, and that's where I'd encourage bringing the community in, bringing in diverse speakers, etc., to provide that diversity and really embedding that and thinking about that in your curriculum planning. But if you're in a situation where actually our community is very diverse, but then if we look within our community, within our school, and we haven't been able to attract that diverse pool, it's really about reflecting and looking at how you're attracting those teams, maybe seeking support with that. And it might be getting in consultancy to talk to you about, well, what are your recruitment strategies? How are you reaching out to people who perhaps are different from your circle to bring those different voices into your school?
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
go on, Aretha, sorry.
Just to add to that, the importance of allyship. So you might be the only BAME leader in that school. You might be leading a school where actually majority of the students are white. Well, actually, it doesn't stop you from, creating a diverse curriculum. It doesn't stop you from talking about ethical curriculums and tolerance and acceptance and the difference between the two. It doesn't stop you, as Youlande said, about usualizing differences. It doesn't stop that process from happening. And actually, the more we make that part of our core threads in schools, the more the landscape is likely to change later. might not change overnight. It hasn't changed overnight. But if we don't start, it's never going to change. And I think that creating allies who understand and can empathise and can call others to action is really important. We can't do it on our own. We can't do it in isolation. It has to be a collaborative effort. And that means that we have to break down barriers between us, and we have to identify and understand where other people are coming from in order to create a more cohesive, solution-focused pathway.
Which is why we're in this together, right? Exactly. So again, one of some of the comments have been around the fact that it can feel very isolating to be a teacher if you are in a school where you don't see anybody who looks like yourself. And you've talked about the attrition rate, the unacceptable attrition rate of teachers leaving the profession of all races, but particularly, we want to work with those teachers in their early career, early stages. So you've got an event coming up in August. What other kinds of things have you got planned for your Mindful Equity UK network that you're going to be able to offer? Who's going to take that?
I'll start and then let Youlande continue. We've got big plans.
I can see in your eyes, Aretha. Oh, I think we've just lost Aretha.
All right.
So I'll start off while she's joining back in.
Okay, thank you.
I will. So with Mindful Equity, there are a number of strands to which we are working towards. The first one is the early career teachers, but to access that pool of talent, we have been contacting a plethora of training providers from various different universities to the sort of non-orthodox, non-PGCE routes. And by accessing those networks, we're able to, oh, she's go for it. I was just explaining about the way that we're connecting with the trainee teachers, Aretha. So the first stance is to have those network meetings, so the bi-termlies. Now, why we're doing that, because from experience, even as a senior leader moving to another school, it's, well, how do they run inset? Are you wearing your own clothes? Are you not wearing your own clothes? Or I'm going into a school, well, actually, I'm going to be the only Black member of staff. What often happens, which again, many Black teachers can attest to, and Asian teachers, the students who look like you flock to you. And from a pastoral perspective, you end up being that support network for them. So again, having a network outside of school to support you, to be those allies, to be those champions, to support you, and having those conversations with the students and supporting them to go back to the other members of staff to build those relationships is important. So you've got the network element. Aretha, do you want to do one of the other elements?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I got so excited I dropped out of the call. So in terms of all the other parts, we have obviously that networking element that draws in allies to it, but we're also trying to create some influence within that pipeline of talent that we keep going on about, because actually that's where the real change will happen. And so we've done a lot of reaching out to universities to actually get in early at their undergraduate or their PGCE course. So actually we're building a lot of capacity going forward. We're building that resilience, we're building that inspirational thinking and that creative solution focused way of working, because actually if we can do it there, then those are the tools that carry on. Those are the journeys that carry on and change that landscape. And so we're diverting a lot of energy into reaching out to universities, and we've got some good feedback. So hopefully we'll be able to get some traction there. But those are, I think, the two main focuses of our service at the moment. We do have that website that we're building, so please do come and check it out. It is still being built and things are being added all the time. So you're welcome to stop by.
Okay, well, we wish you the very best of luck, and the Chartered College is absolutely right behind you. I've promised to write you a blog, and we'll promote any events that you're running, of course. And I hope very much that we can continue the conversation all together, and that Uzma, that you will enjoy joining with that conversation as well. We do have an event next Tuesday on the 21st, which we've got Nahida Marasingham, who is the head teacher of Rathburn Primary in Lewisham, and Professor Paul Miller, and they're going to be talking about a diverse curriculum, but also the lived experience of being in school. So do join us for that. But thank you very much, all of you, and for everybody who's joined us this evening for this webinar. It's been a fantastic start, but there's so much that we all have to do. And I'm very conscious that this is not about you doing something on our behalf. This is about us really being active so that everybody works together, because we are in this together. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And thank you very much to our participants. You've been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.